so during this month of Holy Souls, I thought it'd be nice to have, to seek medical attention. So we've sought you out, John. John's a graduate of Trinity College and went to medical school in Arkansas. He was a young wayward child on campus when I was chaplain there. And he's done well. He got a nicer car than I was still chaplain, and on Facebook I see pictures of this Mustang. Like, I can't believe it. He's a nice. He's married, lovely wife Heidi, and has 2 little baby girls. So, thank you for coming.
Good. No, thank you. Well, it's good to meet everybody. First thing I'd like to do is start with a question to throw this out there what Father's talking about, okay? Who here has some kind of a living will or end-of-life type of document? Anybody here? Hands? Okay, so a few people. Do you really know what it says in it?
I do.
Okay. Yeah, there's a lot of people that are really afraid of that type of thing. I want to start with that because that comes up a lot with people. People will always come to me and they'll say, well, I have a living will. I have a living will. You know, we want this on record. I have this. You know, it says everything that I want. And some people, on the other hand, are actually afraid of them. They'll say, well, if I have a living will, it means that you won't treat me, or it means you're going to let me die, or you're not going to do anything for me. And both extremes are kind of wrong. It's neither nor. It kind of explains what exactly you want the hospital staff to do. And as Father's kind of touching on, there's ordinary and extraordinary measures. And some of these are covered in these documents, be it artificial life support, respiration, cardiac care, feeding tubes, things of this nature, some things more invasive than others. Now, the reason why I want to touch on that is because there are some things that one would say are extraordinary, some are ordinary, depending on the level of technology that we have. Okay, things are constantly evolving. The reason this actually first came up was because back before what were known back when as heart-lung machines were created, or bypass machines as they call them now, the minute somebody's heart stopped, that was it. Death. Can't do anything, end of story. No questions asked. You know, there was a black and a white. There was no gray area. Since that's come about that we have these machines, now it's judged more by brain death, which is what we go by, which actually is determined by 2 experts in the hospital, 2 physicians who have to agree on it in a very complex case, depending on a certain set of criteria, medical criteria that they have to fulfill. And the reason this is very difficult to define is because, say you have somebody there who could technically be called brain dead, as the term is tossed around. Well, technology has become so good that we are extremely good at keeping a body alive. Okay, and I use the word body because the mind could be gone, but we can keep everything else working and running. And that's where the gray area comes in, as to what exactly is it that you want to do if this is not functioning properly. And I've seen it many times. I saw a person when I was in med school with a 92-year-old man who had pretty much 0 brain activity, but had a breathing tube, had medicines going to keep his heart going, to keep his kidneys functioning, to make sure everything was working properly, feeding tube placed here directly into his stomach, all these things. And the main reason why this was going on, because we asked our head attending physician at the time, because we were just medical students, well, why is this going on? Why is this continuing? And the reason that it was because there was a son who had been estranged from this parent for 30 some odd years. And the minute the parent wound up in the hospital, they felt this huge guilt. And they said, you know what, we're going to do everything. Everything has to be done. We got to keep going. We need breathing support, feeding, all these types of things. And we were always wondering, why is he doing this? Why is he doing this? And there must have just been a complete sense of guilt that I personally can't relate with. But that's the kind of area that we're talking about, is that extraordinary means for people can usually include breathing tubes as such, cardiac support devices, things of that nature, which if you would like to have them, there's nothing that says you can't. I mean, there's nothing morally not permissible about them, but you don't have to use them. Okay, and that's something that really you should decide and talk with your family members about before these things happen, which is what you were touching on, Father. So I know for certain that if I was in certain situations and I wasn't really able to breathe for myself, or if there was no breathing machine, that I would die, that I would not want the breathing machine. And that's morally permissible. That's something you can do. You can't withhold food from people. You can't do that type of thing. That's not according to the church. So you really have to figure out what exactly it is that you would want to do in case some sort of life-changing event happened, a horrible car accident or something that could occur. Yes, sir.
If you were brain dead, would you want a breathing tube?
Personally, no.
If
Now,
you weren't brain dead, would you want a breathing tube?
again, it depends. Let's say that it's me right now.
Yeah.
Okay, this happens all the time. You get in a car accident, or something else occurs where you have a bad lung injury. They have to do lung surgery on you. But you're not strong enough to breathe on your own. You may be on that assistance for a week or two, okay, with the tube, unable to breathe for yourself. They may have trouble. They may not be able to wean you off the assistance for a while. But if I were in that situation, I'd say, you know what, everything else is going fine. Let's try to keep this going. Let's try to see if I can get off this thing.
So you can define the situations.
Correct.
When you want it, when you don't.
And you define a family member or someone close to you who's your proxy in order to help make those decisions for you if you're not really able to at that point. And the reason that would be is that even if your mind's working and you have the breathing tube, that's not a pleasant thing. So normally they'll keep you somewhat sedated with medication.
You can't communicate.
Yeah, either you can't communicate. Even if you could write something out, it's very difficult to legally accept that, because if you're on all these sedatives and medications, you can't really make a decision for yourself.
Yeah.
So that's where you need the proxy to kind of define that for you. Does that kind of help define that for you somewhat?
And in terms of the proxy, if you're married and you say, well, my wife, my husband, your spouse, is that a good thing, or should it be a third party, like a son, daughter?
Younger person.
I'll say
younger,
this.
Unless
Unless you define otherwise, legally the spouse is the first person to make the decisions.
Okay.
Okay, so if you said nothing, they would be the ones that the hospital would go to by default.
Okay.
Unless there's, divorce or this, that, or, separation, however it may
Or the
be.
spouse was at that point not capable.
Correct.
We
Whatever.
would have to change.
Correct. Then it would move to other family members such as children. Okay? Kind of moves down the line. Short past that, if there's no family members, it usually falls to someone designated in the hospital, whether it works for the hospital or potentially the state. Then it gets more into nitty-gritty things that I'm not 100% sure, to be honest with you. But another thing that I definitely wanted to touch on, because this is another one of those big hot button issues, is comfort care versus assisted suicide, what people say. And the reason I want to get into that is because sometimes when people are at the end of life, their body's shutting down, their kidneys aren't functioning well, their heart's starting to give out, things of that, the physicians will say, well, we can do what we can to make them comfortable. And sometimes that'll scare people, because people will think, oh, you're going to drug them until they stop breathing, and then they're going to die, you're killing them. And again, there's a fine line, because now with all the stuff that's going on in Oregon, other initiatives that have even been proposed here, as you well know, there's definitely a line. And I can speak to it personally, because in anesthesia, what I do, I'll do sedation for, say, colonoscopies, which I'm sure a fair amount of people here have had. Okay, I do that almost a daily basis. And in doing so, when you first put a patient out under anesthesia or sedation at that point, you're not really sure just how they're going to act. You can only go based on experience, how much you should give, etc. And when you give a certain amount, usually the patient does what we call going apneic, which means they stop breathing. The medication actually dulls the center that tells you have to breathe, okay? And the medication we use only does that for a few seconds, or up to even a minute, depending. And that's actually very beneficial, because when you're that sedate, it's very easy to either start the colonoscopy, or if people have had upper endoscopies, you need to kind of blunt the responses here that would cause you to cough and gag when a scope is going down. And then the patient starts breathing again. Okay, and then they start up on their own. You give little bits of medication to keep them out until we're all finished, and they wake up after. So you can see that there's a line, there's a continuum, a spectrum, if you will. Same thing comes with end-of-life care. People who are experienced with such medications, pain medications such as morphine, fentanyl, things of that sort that I use on a daily basis, you learn and you know how to dose to give a certain effect. So you can either give little bits, or you can start a slow drip that goes in. And in comfort care, that's what people will do. That's what the physicians will do. You start a certain amount, a little bit of pain medicine to help them out, not so much that they stop breathing, okay, but just enough to make them comfortable. So you're not giving huge doses to plow people under, have them not breathe, and then that's it, they die, end of story. That's physician-assisted suicide, and that's the line that, I never even want to be presented with, because I would never even entertain the possibility. But before getting to that point, comfort care is not hastening someone's death. It's not something to be afraid of. It's more a measure so that the person is comfortable while they're in the process of passing, so they're not in agonizing pain before they have their last breath. Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a question about the morphine drip.
Yes.
I had an aunt who broke her hip, and she was quite elderly, and they said that she wasn't in condition to operate, so she had the morphine in a nursing home. And what ended up happening was they let her control the amount of morphine that
Yes.
she had. And I'm sure that it got to be more and more, and then she passed. I mean, what's the difference between that and a controlled drop, or is that common to do, to give the
That
patient
actually,
control?
yes, I can speak to that readily, because in the hospital, usually the anesthesiologist set up most of those type of medications. And usually the way that it's programmed, it's the same that I do for people who have labor epidurals, people having babies. Okay, it's a similar system. You have a pump that's programmed to give a certain amount per hour, okay? And some of them have, as you're alluding to, these buttons that they come with as well. The pumps are very smart. We program them so that they can only give as much as we want them to give for a certain amount of time. So it's not like you're giving medication and then someone keeps hitting the button and you just go up, 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 up. It doesn't work like that. It's more that you'll set it so that it gives them a certain amount when they push the button. And then the machine's smart enough so that for, say, a half hour or an hour after that, you can push the button as much as you can, and it won't give you a single drop more than you get with the regular infusion. So that's there so that patients can give themselves a little bit extra if it's not cutting it. But believe it or not, a lot of the function actually is mental. There's a lot of belief that if people feel they're in control of their pain control, they are much happier. As I can imagine that everybody would kind of vouch for,
I feel better.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, sure, I can control this. There we go, and that's fine, because in our line of work, we always say that pain is what the patient says it is.
Yeah.
Okay, it's nothing we can define. It's whatever someone's feeling. So, if doing this makes them happy and feel better, excellent. So be it.
Okay, thank you for answering that.
No,
I
you're
was
welcome.
curious about the difference between that and the other.
Absolutely, sir.
I think one of the toughest things, though, is for people that they're either in a bad car accident or serious injuries where they go into a coma. And, that's where it gets sticky on, is this person, are we going to keep them alive? Are they going to come out of the coma? I mean, I've heard stories about people being in comas for years and years and they come out of it. I mean, how does a decision made on something like that?
Well, nobody can give you a definitive answer on that. There's nothing that I could say or any other physician that will say, there's no way that guy's ever going to get up. Well, I mean, you could be 99.9% sure, all indications letting you know, and perhaps they would in 20, 25 years. Who knows? Brain is very mysterious. It's probably the last thing about the body that we barely scratch the surface. We really don't know how it works. I mean, it's funny that you mention that because in anesthesia, believe it or not, the anesthetic gases that we use that people breathe when they're out under general anesthesia in the operating room, still nobody fully understands how they work. After 120 years of having these things around, we just know that it does. And there's all kinds of theories as to how they will, but none has ever been proven. Okay, and part of that is because we really don't know how the brain works. So going along with that, I'll give you an example. There's this syndrome, well, not really a syndrome, but a condition that's called locked in. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. It's a very unique condition where, as you can tell, if somebody has a bad accident and they sever their spinal cord at a certain place, they'll lose function of their legs. Or if someone breaks their neck at a certain point, they'll lose function of their arms and legs. They're quadriplegic and they're stuck in a wheelchair. Well, there's some very unfortunate people where they literally have an injury right at a certain level in the brainstem where they can't do anything. Can't talk, can't breathe on their own, can't legs, body, nothing. You would have no clue that these people have any survivability at all, except what's above the brainstem is still functioning. So with these people, you can actually talk to them and you can say, if you understand me, blink your eyes once. They'll do it. If you want to say no, blink twice. They'll do it. Their higher brain functions, who you are basically, are still functioning, but everything else is not working. And there's no medical way at this point to reestablish that connection. So that's the closest thing to say, that I could say to the difference between brain dead, not brain dead. And I've actually seen it once or twice in my training. And, those type of people are totally dependent. Breathing tube, everything. They couldn't, because the muscles that control your diaphragm that let you breathe in and out, the nerves that control that are below that level, so they don't work either. So again, you can maintain those people alive indefinitely with these machines, but for instance, that gentleman indicated through blinking and communication that he did not wish to go on like this if he was not able to even breathe for himself. And in that case, again, that's, those are extraordinary measures. This patient without unbelievable support would die on his own. Yes, ma'am.
Another question on my late father. He was not able to breathe. He was aspirating and his food, and they wanted to, for comfort for him, they wanted to put the food tube down his stomach.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem is that the food was going directly into his lungs. Now, is that an extraordinary measure or a comfort measure, or does that, how does that relate to?
Well, feeding people is never an extraordinary measure, and there are other ways to do that.
But that would kind of kill him, So.
Well, and this again, as you're getting at, becomes very complex.
Right.
Because there are multiple ways of doing that. You can have a tube down the nose, down the throat, or what's
Put it in
more
the
common
Yeah.
is they just have a feeding tube here if it's going to be a long-term type of thing. Now, that usually works very well so long as the person doesn't have a lot of gastric reflux. It's the same thing when people have heartburn. That's your gastric acid coming back up into your throat. And if these people have whatever it is that's being put in there, be it Ensure or whatever type of formula that they use, that stuff can also come up and can be aspirated as well. Now, the aspiration just happens because as people get old, their muscle coordination is not as good. Be it
severe
hands,
dementia.
whatever, dementia, and the same goes for the muscles here, because when you swallow, it's very, very complex. There's a whole set of muscles that work to close a flap over where you breathe so food can go down so it doesn't go in the lung. Very highly coordinated process, and that breaks down over time. So no matter what you would do, that person may chronically aspirate a little bit over and over, causing, as I'm sure you know, pneumonias to set up, all types of breathing difficulties, issues. But at the same time, it would never be permissible to just say, okay, we're going to deny them food and give them nothing. That's, as far as I'm concerned, Father, that's not.
And it's always good to remember that
permissible.
we start off our first look at that, every human being has dignity. The dignity is given us because Jesus Christ became like us. So there's something really phenomenal about us, no matter what shape we're in, no matter how useful we are. Babies aren't that useful. They're awfully cute. And maybe people that are really elderly can't do what they used to do, but they're awfully cute too. And you're saying we have to recognize that dignity. I was in St. Francis Hospital with poor Father Pepe. Everything was wrong. Everything was wrong. Very nice priest. But he fell and broke his hip. I was with a whole bunch of people who were bringing him in, and he went into cardiac arrest, and so they called the code on him to get the crash cart in and revive him. I was with Sister Cecilia Scuduto, who's going to speak next Monday, and she screamed, "Stop, stop it. He doesn't need, it was a DNR, do not resuscitate." And they're like, "Who are you?" She's a geneticist. She's brilliant. She knows exactly why and what's ethical, what's not ethical. The previous time, nurse made the mistake, that poor nurse, said, "Well, look at them." The other priest from the retirement homes, "Look at, he has no dignity." Wrong thing to say to sister. She blasted that. Now I thought she went to the wall. And said, you never lose your dignity. We always have to be respectful. One of the things I like working about with some of the Catholic funeral homes is when they go in to do a removal with the body, the body's the temple of the Holy Spirit, and they're always respectful. And they're very careful the way they handle it. It's just really, it's very different. It's not like a company coming in and I've been in some removals that were didn't sit well with me because no one was there. Oh, it's just the shell. This is someone's loved one, and if no one loves them, God loves them. So we never forget the dignity, and to set these things up beforehand. There's situations we never anticipate. The day I was installed here, I finished, had a nice little my parents' 50th wedding anniversary, and then we came over and we were having something to eat, something to drink. And my brother got a phone call that my uncle had been found dead. He was only 67. And, the way he died alone, and it was awful. And there was no chance for him to get any treatment at all. He bled to death. He hit his head and passed out. And they didn't find him for a couple of days. He lived by himself, and we were very close, but everybody was away, and he chose not to come up to visit. And you're like, I wish I had the opportunity to do those things. Every death is unique. Each passing is unique. It's not like, well, I've seen this case 1,000 times before. No, you haven't. It's each person.